Hi everyone. The NHS service is in crisis. We have an ageing population, and with all the cuts to services, everyone is feeling the strain. GPs want to spend more time with their patients, especially those that are suffering from loneliness, isolation, and depression. In fact, a GP in Exeter wrote recently, as part of a document called Health is a Social Movement, that it's like a revolving door. The same patients keep coming back over and over again. They need people, not pills. He said that he estimates between 40 and 55% of his patients every week would be better off being supported by another person. Loneliness is a really huge problem in this country. 200,000 older people were reported to have not had a conversation with another person for over 1 month. But loneliness doesn't just affect older people. It can affect anyone of all ages, any of us here at any times of our lives. So how could time banking actually help? Time is the currency, and time banking encourages people to help one another in communities. So for every hour that someone gives to help someone else, they will receive an hour in return, with which they can spend that hour at the time bank asking for some help themselves. That could be in the home, in the garden, walking a dog. It can be anything. And when people are given the opportunity to help one another in this way, it creates natural, mutual, practical and social support networks, thereby automatically reducing isolation and improving the health and well-being of local people. Time banking can underpin healthcare services and has been doing that since the late 1980s, when it was first introduced to this country. I'd like you all to meet Dennis. So Dennis was a chap that was referred to the time bank that I used to run a few years ago. And Dennis was referred to my time bank by the police and social services. And that is because Dennis would claim his benefits. He would go to the pub, he'd have too much to drink, he'd get into trouble. And they happened to mention the time bank to Dennis. He was in his 60s, he couldn't read or write. So Dennis came to the time bank and sat down with me. And the first thing he said was, "Sarah, I don't know if this is going to be for me. I've been told people exchange skills. I don't have any skills. I can't do anything." And what was interesting is that was his own self-perception, that he could not do anything. So we had a conversation, we had a couple of cups of coffee, and we talked about the kinds of things that Dennis might like to do for other people in the community. And we started him off helping mow people's lawns. He helped prepare walls for decorating. And Dennis started to earn time credits. He even came into the time bank and helped me run the time bank. He was my meter and greeter. So he would welcome people into the time bank and he would make them teas and coffees for me. And all of these activities were earning him time credits. So how did he spend his time credits? He had the occasional haircut. We had a mobile hairdresser that was part of our time bank. He swapped his time credits for a football ticket. So the local football club was a member of the time bank as an organisation. And for 2 hours of time, he could then swap for a ticket to go and see the local football club play. And he would bring his post in every morning. So somebody would read his post to him and explain to him what the letters were all about and kind of help him if he had to make a phone call or something like that. And after a few months, Dennis came back in, and this is exactly what he said to me. "I'm feeling more cheerful now than I did just sitting indoors watching the TV. I'm staying out of the pub, I'm staying out of trouble, and I'm being kept busy. My mind's on other things. Not only that, but I'm getting to meet new friendly people." And I think that was the key thing for Dennis. He then said he could walk up the high street and people would stop and say, "Hi Dennis, thanks for that. Thanks for helping me in the garden the other day." And he said to me that never happened to him before. He actually felt part of the community. So when I left the time bank because I moved home. Dennis was being taught to read and write by a retired school teacher, all of this for time credits. And he signed a leaving card for me, and my two daughters found that actually quite emotional because they said to me, Dennis was there and he actually wrote his name in your card, Mum. And that was the first time that he'd done that. So that was just fantastic. So time banking naturally connects people in communities and builds relationships. It's an asset-based philosophy. We absolutely believe that every single person in the community has got something of value, something they can offer somebody else. So it's really good at connecting people that society might feel as disadvantaged or vulnerable or hard to reach, because we value everyone equally and everyone's hour is the same. Also, we found that people that get involved in a time bank network might not necessarily see themselves as traditional volunteers. So when I went out in the community, people would say, is this just kind of another volunteering thing? Not really into it. And then I said, well, it's kind of not. Would you just like to help someone else in the community? And they said, oh, yeah, I don't mind helping someone in the community. Yeah, that's fine. And I said, well, that is what this is all about. It's just about helping each other. So just to be clear, the difference between time banking and volunteering is that volunteering is more of a one-way street. You give your time to an organisation, maybe on a set day, set number of hours. It's kind of a bit formal. Time banking isn't like that. It's a two-way street. You give and you receive time. It's low level, it's informal. You do something that you want to do when you want to do it for someone else in the community. So another example of how groups can get together and do time banking as a kind of a social outing. This is a really good example. So I had like kind of half a dozen local people that joined the time bank but weren't too sure what to do to help somebody else. And I'd gone along to a local supported housing scheme and went in, and I've got to be honest, it was actually quite a depressing place to be. So I went into where they had a common room, and the staff would bring the residents into the common room, wheel them in their chairs, and they would eat their meals, and then they'd be wheeled back out again into their accommodation. And there was no interaction, there was no conversation, there was no talking. It was really, really quiet. So I asked a couple of these residents, and I said, do you ever get out, get some fresh air? I said, the park's just across the way. They've got lovely botanical gardens. And they said, I haven't been to that park, one lady said, for 26 years. She said, I haven't got anyone to push my wheelchair. That's not the job of the care home staff. So we don't really go out. So it seemed to me a natural progression. Okay, we'll ask some of the time bank members to take these ladies and gents out in their wheelchairs for a couple of hours to the park. And that's what we did, and they absolutely loved it. It's kind of filling a gap that's there that people that are in paid positions either haven't got the time or the capacity to actually do. So the time credits were exchanged between the care home and the residents who pushed the wheelchairs. So it wasn't a one-to-one with the people with disabilities giving the time to the people that were pushing them. It's a good example of an organisation to person time swap. So I'd just like everyone to have a little think. So what kinds of things do you think you might give and receive if there was a time bank here? So this is a good example of an expression of interest form. So when local people say, what are we talking about? What kinds of things do people give and receive? You can clearly see there, even with the cartoons, that there's going to be something there that every single person in this room could do for someone else. So the idea is that you would tick 3 things that you might help somebody with on one side, and you would tick 3 things that you might need some help with. It might be something that you kind of hate doing, like ironing. I had 3 ladies in the time bank that all wanted to do ironing. Couldn't believe it. They were so busy. They said it was a way that they could actually just relax. So fantastic. So all of these, when people fill out this expression of interest form, all the information gets put onto a computer system in order to make the best matches. And I just want to point out here that people that earn time credits, you don't have to keep them yourselves and spend them at the time bank. You can save them. They do in Japan. It's like a kind of pension for when you might need it later on. You can spend them, as I've said, or you can donate them to somebody else in your community. You can join the Time Bank as a family, and family members can do time exchanges and give them to mum, dad, granny, grandpa. It's a great way to do, you know, if there's money is scarce and youngsters want to get involved in the time banking scheme, they can give time credits to mum for Mother's Day, dad for Father's Day, can get the car washed, get someone to mow the lawn. So I've been talking about time banking as being around since the late 1980s. So if that's the case, why isn't there a time bank on every street corner, in every village, in every town, in every city? That's because there are challenges. So we have to be honest, there are challenges. And Time Banking UK is trying to address those challenges and yet still keep the informality of time banking going. So the formal mechanisms that we are introducing, one of them is the member handbook. So we give handbooks like this to every time bank network that wants to get created. And those handbooks will get given to each person that joins the time bank. And in that handbook are things like a code of conduct. What is acceptable behaviour within the time bank and what isn't acceptable behaviour within the time bank? Sometimes it needs to be spelled out. Then there would be, what would you do if something goes wrong? So we talk to time banks and discuss with them about what their legal structure might need to be. We talk to them about governance. If there's a complaint, who are going to be the decision makers within that time bank? You need to have this thought through and planned out. And because there is a responsibility for safeguarding and minimising risk, we recommend that the time bank is coordinated by a broker or another person that can take that responsibility on and make sure that our processes and policies are adhered to within that whole time bank network. The other thing is about managing people's expectations. So it's about making it clear what time banking is and what time banking isn't. It's not going to be a magical solution that is going to solve all the problems of that community. And you know what? It's not replacing paid services. So if you want a professional service done, you might need to pay for it because people within the time bank are doing things to the best of their ability. I had a lady that walked into my time bank. She came in, she went, "This is great. I've sacked my cleaner, I've sacked my gardener. It's fabulous. I'm just get local people to come in every week and do all this for free." And I said, no, that's not what this is all about. If you want that service and you would pay for it otherwise, that's what you need to continue to do because people are only doing things to the best of their ability to give someone a hand every now and again. So what is happening across the UK? Our organisation covers the UK in its entirety. And all of these bullet points list the priority groups of people that some time banks prioritise. Now, this could be because there's a higher number of older people in the community or younger people in the community, and that's kind of naturally what those activities are going to be based around. Or it could be around funding. So there might be funding out there for people that are homeless, for people that have got disabilities, so they're the priority group. But I must point out that a time bank won't work unless the whole community is involved. There needs to be that diverse range of activities that are being given and received within the community. So just one example here about the refugees and asylum seekers point. It's really interesting for us because in London, one of the councils have decided that this is the way forward and that they would like to use time banking as a mechanism to integrate refugees and asylum seekers into the community. Now, the reason it's different is because they realise that it's an asset-based philosophy and they want to change the perceptions of the community and those individuals so that they're seen as being an asset to the community, giving something to the community rather than taking and receiving services. So at the moment, our statistics are showing 41,000 people, 41,000 people are all exchanging time, 5,500 organisations and 3.1 million hours has been exchanged. We know this because we give software to the time banks to use. And that's not just so that we can collect those statistics, it's so that time banks can actually have those statistics as well and they can pull off reports. They can see where the activity is happening in the community, who is doing the time exchanges, on what and with whom. So, who were the other supporters of time banking? I've had the longest conversation I think I've ever had. Probably lasted about a year with the Department of Work and Pensions. So they called me into London to sit me down and say, yeah, government's been talking about kind of sharing economy, and what's time banking? Tell us what it is. And after about a year of conversation, they finally got it. Time banking is not volunteering. It is different to volunteering. So they've issued a statement which went through their lawyers, and now that statement has gone to every job centre in the country to say that time banking is a really good thing for people on benefits because it increases your self-confidence and your self-esteem and your skill set, and that it can be used towards those job-seeking hours if you're on those benefits, which is absolutely fantastic for us. As I say, that was probably the longest conversation I've had. The NHS are really, really keen to support these mutual support networks because they see the health and wellbeing benefits straight away. But it's not just the health and wellbeing benefits, it's the realisation that actually it's going to take the strain off of the healthcare service if it's done properly. We've got 2 county councils currently investing in time banking networks across the entire counties. That's being paid for out of the adult social care budgets. And this is a really great example of how one council in Barnet had publicised the time bank by putting that poster on every single bus stop in the borough, so that local people, when waiting for a bus, could see, oh, I get it. That makes sense to me. I'll just give them a ring and see if I can go and join. And the Welsh organisation Cadw, which is our equivalent of the National Trust, called me up and came to visit to say, we would really like to see some people coming to see our historic sites and castles in Wales that maybe wouldn't otherwise be able to do so. So we sat down and worked it out that if somebody helped someone else in the community for 7 hours, they could swap those 7 hours for a day pass to go to any Welsh historic site or castle. So that goes for everybody. And all they asked in return was maybe a couple of lines as to how did you earn your 7 hours time credits, who did you help in your community, so they can put it onto their website. So that's about it from me. I just want to finish by saying that time banking is for everyone. Any age, any ability, any background. The NHS is in crisis, but time banking can help. Thank you.